In this video, we will show you how to replace your fuel pump sending unit on this Ford F-150. This will be located along the driver's side of your vehicle's truck bed. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to mention is we're going to have to lower the fuel tank, so make sure you're in a safe area to do so. After that, we're going to have to release fuel pressure from the system. For that, we're going to make our way safely under the vehicle. Now we're underneath the vehicle. We can see the fuel tank. As you make your way towards the rear of the fuel tank, you can see a frame cross member making its way across from one side of the vehicle to the other. And just above the fuel tank, we can see a wiring harness leading up to the fuel pump control module. We're going to reach just above the top of this electrical connector, squeeze in on the locking tab and disconnect it. A quick inspection for corrosion, and we'll set that aside. Now let's make our way out from under the vehicle and attempt to start the vehicle. You'll find that it starts, it runs, and then it eventually stalls out. Attempt to start it one more time, it should not start. I'm in the passenger compartment, let's go ahead and start up the vehicle. All right, stalled right out. Let's try it again. Perfect. Remove your key, exit your vehicle. Now we're making our way under the hood to the battery. The terminal end that's closest to the front of the vehicle is your negative battery terminal. We're going to loosen up this 10mm nut just enough that this is loose and we can lift it up and away from the battery. A quick inspection for corrosion. If you see any, you definitely want to take care of that. We'll set that aside so it's making no contact with the battery. After doing that, we're making our way back to the fuel door. Go ahead and open that up. We want to make sure that we're not going to build up any pressure inside the fuel system, so I'm just going to go ahead and hold this open. For that, I'm using a plastic trim tool. Whatever you use, you want to make sure it's not something small enough that can fall inside this area where you cannot retrieve it. This will not fall in. Let's go ahead and pause here. We're going to safely raise and support. Now, since the fuel system will be open, you want to make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. We're going to make our way just underneath this area above the frame where we can see our fuel filler neck and the hose leading to the fuel tank. We're going to start disconnecting that right along this area here. You can use a 7mm or a flathead screwdriver, whatever's best for you. Now that we have some movement from that clamp right there, we'll continue on with dislodging the hose from the tube. For this, I'm just using an angled pick. You want to be careful not to damage your hose. Just make our way around. Just a quick inspection, make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. We're making our way back underneath the vehicle, and we're paying attention to the fuel tank. Along the very front of the fuel tank is where you're going to find that you have your fuel line. We're going to disconnect each one of these two fuel lines. They disconnect a little bit different than each other. We'll start with the smaller one here. For this one, it actually has a couple tabs that you need to carefully try to squeeze. Pull this out and away. We can see this blue tab right here. This will have to pull down towards us. There's a tab right up along the top here. You just want to go ahead and press that and then start pulling it away. You can see that starting to move. Do the same on the other side at the same time. Once it starts breaking free, we'll continue on with a small pick or even a small screwdriver and gently start pulling it away. Now, as you start to disconnect this, keep in mind there could still be some fuel pressure inside of the system. We have our collection receptacle underneath this area, and we're sure we're wearing hand and eye protection at all times. Now it's time for the larger line here. For this one, it has two squeezable tabs, one on the top, one on the bottom, that you could squeeze with your fingers and dislodge, or you can carefully use some pliers. For me personally, I'm going to use some pliers. It gives me a little bit extra leverage, and we'll pull that right off of there. A quick inspection, and we'll set that aside. I use my pliers to break it free, and then I can fully remove it. Continuing on, we're going to apply support underneath our fuel tank, but keep in mind we will have to lower the fuel tank, so make sure you're in a safe area to do so. Let's start applying upward pressure, and we can start removing our two straps. To remove our straps, we'll be using a 13 millimeter. As you remove your mounting hardware, a quick inspection, replace as necessary. Let's go ahead and take hold of that strap. You should be able to separate it. You can use a pry bar if necessary. We're going to pull this down towards the center of the vehicle to dislodge it. Let's go ahead and pivot this. We should be able to remove it from the slot on the frame. A quick inspection of that strap. If it looks like it's rotted and damaged, just go ahead and replace it. This one looks fine. Let's repeat the process for the forward strap. Let's get the forward strap, same process here. There's the forward strap. Now we can start carefully lowering this down. We'll take our time on this, especially if the fuel tank has a lot of fuel in it. Now keep in mind, as you bring this down, there is some things that we need to dislodge along the top as well. Now once you have it low enough that you can gain access to the top of the fuel tank, there's a couple things that we're going to dislodge now, and then we'll continue on with it down closer to the ground where we can easily gain access to the rest. We're going to start with this one wiring harness that's right along here. It has a small squeeze tab. Just go ahead and squeeze that in and disconnect this. A quick inspection for corrosion, of course, and we'll continue on. That one looks good. Now if we follow this larger wiring harness down, we're going to find that we have a wire tie holding this in place. Go ahead and cut that off, and we'll follow that all the way down to our fuel sending unit. Now for this larger wiring harness, you're going to find that it has a red locking tab that we have to dislodge, and then we can squeeze in on the next tab to remove this. To dislodge this, I'm using a small pocket screwdriver. We'll just make our way up inside that area and push it off towards the side. Now that we have that dislodged, we're also going to disconnect this line. For this line, we have a small tab that we're going to make our way underneath with our small pocket screwdriver and gently pry this away. After it starts prying away, we can dislodge that line from the fuel pump assembly. Now that we have the clip dislodged, let's go ahead and pull the line off of here. Just go ahead and give it a light twist. Out and away. A quick inspection to confirm that the seals internally are good, and we can go ahead and set that aside. Let's slowly start bringing the fuel tank down. With the fuel tank in a stable area, we're going to focus along the top of the fuel pump assembly. This is where you can see the two lines leading to it. We're going to start dislodging these. As for the smaller one, it has a locking tab. That locking tab has two ears. You just want to go ahead and take hold of each of those, gently pull them away from the connector, and then you should be able to slide this out. There's one along the top here, and there's one just along the bottom in the same area. For that bottom one, I'm just using a small pocket screwdriver. It's a little easier to get under there. Now that we have that popped off of there, we can go ahead and separate that. A quick inspection of the locking clip, we'll set it aside. Now that we have the red locking tab out of there, we're going to focus on the next tab. Now this one's actually going to protrude from this area, sliding through this way. but there's two locking ears, one on the top here and one on the bottom. If you were looking along this area, you're going to find that there's a small port that you can make your way in with a small pick, and you should be able to pry that ear up a little bit, and we'll start pressing it out. While holding pressure on that one, I'm going to continue on to the next one. There we are, I got that small black clip out of there. We'll set that aside. Go ahead and take hold of the line. We're going to give it a little wiggle here and start sliding it off of there. A quick inspection inside. This looks good, we'll set it aside. Now we'll move along to our next line. For this one, it has two squeezable tabs. You can squeeze those in by hand or use some pliers if necessary. While squeezing it in, go ahead and slide it out of place. That looks good, we'll set that aside as well. Continuing on, you want to make sure you clean up the upper area, especially along where your fuel pump assembly is going to sit into the fuel tank. I've used some compressed air, and then I also used penetrant along this locking ring, making its way all the way around. Continuing on, I'm going to use a rubber mallet and a brass punch, something so we're sure we are not going to cause any sparks anywhere around any of the open fuel ports. Let's go ahead and start tapping on this. We're turning it counterclockwise. Once you have that apart, a quick inspection of the locking ring, confirming it's not rotted or damaged. Let's start lifting this up out of the fuel tank. We're going to have to start maneuvering it around a little bit. Now what you're going to find is that you do have a fuel line up along the top area here of the fuel pump assembly that we need to dislodge. To dislodge this, it has two locking tabs. There's one on either side. We'll just go ahead and squeeze those in together and draw this down and out of place. Slide that into the fuel tank. You want to make sure you have that in an area that you can easily grab hold of it. Now it looks as though our sending unit has actually come apart inside of the fuel tank here. It should be all attached. That's okay if it comes apart, we're replacing it anyway. Keep in mind as you lift this up and out of position, there could be fuel up inside this area. You want to be extremely careful it does not dump out or potentially get caught on your skin. Continuing on, we're going to clean up the mounting surface and give it a thorough inspection. Okay, it's time for installation of our fuel pump assembly. There's a couple things we want to do before we start sliding this down into the tank. The first thing we'll do is make sure that we have our level sensor and float attached to that side. You can see exactly where it needs to press into. Double check, make sure it functions and it does not fall off. Now aside from that, we're also going to install our seal, but this is going to go directly on the fuel tank, right along that ring that we had just cleaned out. Now continuing on, we can start putting this into position. We want to make sure we have it in the proper orientation. The way you can tell is along the top of the fuel pump assembly, you have this one locating tab. And on the fuel tank itself, there's an area that says locator. We'll make sure that we have that properly aligned in its corresponding area. Start bringing it down into position, but keep in mind we do have that one line that we need to attach. Do not forget about this. We'll start with that level float. It's going to go in first. We'll come in at an angle and start bringing this down. Once again, before we go too far here, let's go ahead and connect our one hose along the bottom side. We're just going to carefully reach inside the fuel tank and find that. Now we can see where it's supposed to plug into. We'll just go ahead and bring it right up and in there, press it in, listen for a click. After you've heard the click, you need to give it a tug. It should not fall off. If this falls off, you're definitely going to have a fuel pressure issue. Let's start bringing this down into position. Once again, we're aligning our locator tab with the corresponding area on the fuel tank. Now, as you're holding this down, you're going to continue on with your locking ring. Looking at the locking ring itself, you can see that there's several slots, and each one of those slots goes from a thin area into a wider area. We're going to put those tabs that are part of the fuel tank into the wider area, and then we'll turn this clockwise, locking it in. Locking it in, we're continuing on with our hammer and brass punch. Now this part is extremely important. We need to look all the way around this fuel pump mounting point and double check to make sure each area is properly seated and locked in. Otherwise, you're going to have a vapor leak and potentially a fuel leak up along the top of the fuel tank. Now, of course, as we're connecting our lines, if you had dislodged them from any of their mounting points, you do want to make sure those are pressed in and secured. I'm going to press in this larger line. Once again, we're listening for a click. Double check, make sure it's secure. Let's secure this line. Now it's time for our next line. For this one, we're just going to press it in and we can continue on with our two locking clips. The first one's going to come from the inboard side here. After that, we'll have our next lock coming from the opposite side. Now I'm changing out my locking tab. Mine looked like it was a little weak and I don't like to have that, so I'm just going to replace it with a brand new one. Press that right in there. Just give that a little tug. Should not slide out of place. Now it's time for our red locking clip. One more quick confirmation up along the top here. This is extremely important that each of these are properly secured. Now we're back over at the vehicle. It's time to start getting things close to being in position so we can start reconnecting up along the top of that fuel pump assembly. We'll start bringing this up just high enough that we can reconnect our electrical connectors and of course our fuel line. Now let's start connecting our electrical connectors. I'm going to start with the larger one. As you remember, when we were removing this, we did have that one locking tab. So once we press this in, we hear a click, we're going to lock it down by pressing in on that red locking tab. Now as you can tell, when I pressed that in, I did not hear a click. I gave it a little tug, it slid right out. It's a good thing we checked. Let's go ahead and try that again. You can use some pliers if necessary. It's definitely secure. We're going to lock it down. There we are. We've got the next one. Audible click, a light tug. Now it's time for our fuel line. We'll go ahead and press this on here as far as possible. Before you try removing it, you need to install your locking tab. I'm just going to go ahead and slide that through the slots here. It should fit right in. We'll press it in as far as possible and give that a little tug, confirming it's properly secure. Now we're just going to make sure that we have our other wiring harness up and out of the way for now. Now as we start bringing this up, we're going to have to pay attention to our fuel filler hose making its way up along here. You're going to just flex it so it's up against the frame. Continuing on, we'll start raising the fuel tank up, making sure that the area for the fuel straps is properly aligned. Before you bring it all the way up into the fully upright position, we're paying attention to where that fuel filler hose connects to the filler neck. Align it, press the two together. To do this, once you have it aligned, you can take that fuel tank and bring it all the way over towards the frame of the vehicle. Once you have that hose slid on there as far as possible, continue on with your mounting clamp. For the clamp, it's always best to use a socket rather than a flathead screwdriver. Once you have the clamp in the original position, just go ahead and tighten it up. Okay, right there's where it kind of wants to stop. I'm just going to go a tiny bit further, confirming that we're tight on this. If it's not tight, or even at an angle, you might get a fuel leak in this area, typically during fill-up. If you dislodge the wiring harness, just go ahead and slide that back on. Now we're moving along the front of the fuel tank. We have those two lines up along the front area there. We're going to start connecting them. I'll go with the larger line first. We'll just line this up, press it right in. Listen for a click. Try to pull it apart. It should not come apart. Continuing on, the next line here. We're going to press that one in as far as possible, lock it down. Double check, make sure that one's secure as well. Now we're moving along the back side of the fuel tank. We have the area for that fuel pump control module. We want to reconnect that wiring harness, of course. Press it in, listen for a click, a light tug. Now it's time for the fuel tank straps. I'm going to start with the front one. Just slide it right into its mounting point along where the drive shaft is. We'll swing this up into position, and we have our mounting bolt. We'll go ahead and start this in by hand. Now we can get our rearward strap in. Put that in the frame. Now that we have them both started in, let's go ahead and snug them up. The torque for each of these is 30 foot-pounds. Once you have both the fuel tank straps in place, we can continue on to removing our support from underneath the fuel tank. Let's get this out of here. Now we're making our way up under the hood. We're going to reconnect our negative battery terminal. Of course, you want to make sure you don't have any fuel or vapors anywhere in this area. It can create a spark. We'll press that on there as far as possible. Continue on by snugging it up with your 10mm. Right there is bottomed out. Just a tiny bit further, double check, make sure it's properly secured. Okay, friend, at this point, we're going to make our way into the passenger compartment. You're going to attempt to start up the vehicle. Typically, what you're going to find initially is a long crank scenario. The reason why this is because we have to build up fuel pressure throughout the entire system all the way up to the engine. Okay, friend, we finished our installation and we've started the vehicle. The next thing that you absolutely need to do is confirm that you have no fuel leaks. Any fuel leak can potentially be extremely dangerous. Aside from that, you can go ahead and close the hood and take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.